I am the head of the private securities and the RW division of BitGo, as well as head of BitGo Asia. 제가 한국말이 좀 서툴어서 프레젠테이션은 영어로 좀 하겠습니다. They asked me to present. I mean, first of all, thank you so much for inviting me, and this is an unbelievable event. I remember hearing about this Busan exchange program from a couple friends a couple years ago, and it's been incredible to see, kind of observe the changes we've seen so far. And when I was asked to provide this presentation with this title, How Do We Trust Digital Assets? I started thinking really carefully about this, and I'll talk about this throughout the presentation. But what we're really talking about is how do we trust digital assets in Korea? Because every country, as other colleagues have mentioned before, has very different standards and processes, and frankly, culture, that have a different understanding of what we consider trust. As an example, because I was literally trying to translate this, trust in English, you guys all know what the word trust is. But if you look at the dictionary, it talks about basically believing something to be true, a person or a thing. But then I was looking at the definition of trust in Korean, 신뢰. The actual definition of 신뢰 in Korean, when I was Googling this, you guys can look it up, it actually talks about 타인의 신뢰성. So it doesn't talk about a thing, it talks about person. And that made me think, because in Korea, we don't actually trust the system, we trust people and the culture because of the very conflicting history of Korea. And that kind of, I just want to put that thought in your head as you think about the rest of the presentation, because largely my presentation is from the US perspective, as thinking about how do we trust the technology of blockchain, and obviously what that means. So you get, okay. So this is a fundamental statement of blockchain. I want to start from here before we get into the regulated stuff. The most trustworthy is the most trustless. Hopefully people understand what that means by gut, but what I mean is in the history of commerce, and this is literally the commerce and money, in order for society to survive, we actually have to do transactions with each other. And if you want to do transactions with each other, you require money. And historically, if you want to deal with money, you need someone to verify that transaction. So if you look way back from bartering, I think another colleague mentioned this before, it's evolved from literally, I had a cow, you had an apple. How do we deal with each other? Obviously, if you don't have enough apples to cover the price of my cow, we can't do a deal. And therefore, things like physical objects, and then paper money, we talked about gold. And basically, the transaction history from whenever 6000 BC was to now has been, how do we make transactions more efficient? How do we make things cheaper? And so to me, this is a very natural evolution. And when it talks about the people side of it, what it really means is now, under the technology of blockchain, you don't require people. You just trust. They just exist. The left side is just a very simple graphical representation of what blockchains mean and nodes. It literally means there is no people. Once you have, I mean, I think everyone knows this, but sometimes it's important to dig into the details. It's basically every single blockchain, every single node reflects the same thing. So without having someone to tell you that I own this or you own this or I'm giving you this, it's reflected in the actual blockchain itself. And the graph on the right, hopefully that rings a bell for some people, that's the graphical representation of nodes for Bitcoin around the world. Depending on how you count it, there's between 18,000 and 50,000 nodes for Bitcoin. That means every single Bitcoin transaction ever is reflected instantaneously across 50,000 plus, probably millions if you really count the underlying details, of machines out there. That's trust. But then we live in a world of society. We can't just, especially when we talk about government's regulations, and we talked about some of the TradFi folks here and their experiences, it's actually impossible for us as society to just say, okay, let's trust the blockchain. Right? That's just how it is. There's governments and regulations. We care about investor protections. And so how do you actually increase trust? To me, there's two ways. Responsible technology and responsible regulations. And sometimes both sides or either sides don't understand each other. Actually, I said oftentimes. My background, I actually started as a private equity lawyer. I practiced for 10 years and then got into startups. And I did multiple startups for the last 10 years. And one of the biggest things that I noticed is that the technologists, Silicon Valley, and maybe the equivalent in Korea, we're so enamored about what we can build, we don't really think about whether we should or what other consequences there are. On the flip side, the regulators, the lawyers, the government, they're coming from the other side. They believe they're so stuck, and I mean that in the most respectful way because they have to be, they're the government. They care so much about what you should do, they stop to think about what you could do. So how do we balance that? To me, there's actually 4 different elements, and it's not rocket science. It's actually things you can do to increase actual trust. Simply, one is technology, physical software security. If you talk to, the word custodian is also often used. If you talk to every single custodian in the world, I can guarantee you, not two custodians have the same technology. There's different ways to do everything. There's different ways to build HSMs. There's different ways to code. There's different ways to lock blockchains. That is important, and you should look into that if you're a consumer of blockchain assets. Segregated funds. This was the FTX issue. How do you separate client money with the exchange money or other money or any other categories? Compliance. This is a people problem. How seriously does somebody trust the systems that organization actually implement? And then finally, procedures. Often that goes hand to hand, but you'd be surprised if you actually talk to different groups what that means. And this, for sure, is a role of regulators. How do you actually put the requirements of these systems? One of the ways that we do at BitGo, and a lot of companies do as well, but BitGo, our founder, really invented the multi-sig protocol in some ways. It's very simple. You keep 2 out of 3 keys. But this is an example of technology. When you have a key, you literally separate it. Sorry, you have 3 different keys, and you require 2 of the 3 keys to require every transactions. And then the key that matters for daily purposes, we split that into 5 different categories, for example. And then you basically make sure there's no way that each keys can be compromised. And then there's the regulatory part. And this is back to the cultural part. Korea obviously is in its own process of trying to figure out what it means to be trustworthy in Korea. Because I can tell you that is very, very different from what is trustworthy in the US and Europe. That's a reality. If you want to be working in a country beyond the technology marvels of blockchain, you actually have to follow the local companies' laws. I think there's some European colleagues here as well. Europe's going to come with MiCA. That's going to be very, very different than what's in the US or not in the US. What Korea is working on, I think it's going to be depending on a lot of the conversations that we have today or in functions like this. What else? Insurance. So this is a part that I really talk about a lot to regulators especially, or even corporates. Because we always talk about blockchain in this theoretical way. It's like, no, you increase trust by providing insurance. And you provide insurance if you have good technology and good software and good procedures that you can convince the underwriter to actually insure your processes. So for example, at BitGo, our cold storage processes, there's $250 million of insurance per wallet. And if you want, you can get up to $800 million more. So you can literally get $1 billion worth of insurance on your wallet. That's trust. And the other thing about trust, and this is maybe, depending on how you look at it, early days, but trust has not been a day. So even for us, it took us 12 plus years of going step by step. Literally in the very beginning days, trying to do very simple wallet structures to getting regulated custodians and just expanding different services across. But the key that I want to really focus on here is that even though it took a long time, it is the fastest growing technology ever. I mean, this is a line between internet and blockchain adoption. In year 10, we're literally outpacing internet growth by 2x. And that, I think, goes back to the original technology I mentioned, which is blockchain. And then I think Mr. Kim from Hash provided this before. Yeah, it's the fastest growing ETF, and it's there for a reason. I mean, you literally look at the graphic, it's almost unbelievable. But I mean, the ETF, for example, they just passed, I think this month, 10 month, net $20 billion over growth in Bitcoin ETF. This is new money. It's the fastest ever. But here's the interesting, talking about trust. That number sounds good. Net $20 billion and then $65 billion worth of actual assets in the ETF. If you look at that chart, that blue is BlackRock. That blue is Grayscale. That yellow is BlackRock, and that gray is Fidelity. So that's 3 providers that probably has over 75% of the entire ETF market. What does that mean? It means, yes, people want ETFs, people want Bitcoins for sure. But trust matters. People trust these 3 companies. They don't trust anyone else. It doesn't matter who you are. And this comes to the final point. Trust is always about knowledge and people, and that's the irony, right? Blockchain is about being trustless, and yet, that's why people want it, because it's trustless. And yet, when we actually interact with the counterparty, we want to trust you. We want to trust each other. And how do you do that? You come to a conference like this. I mean, something like this, I think, is critical because we're learning. And once we learn, we don't fear the unknown. And once we know more, we can do more. And frankly, the people here, at the end of the day, we're good actors, or we have to be good actors. And I think if we can do that, blockchain helps. I truly believe we can change the future of finance. Thank you very much.